Welcome back, everyone. So in the previous videos, we've spent some time investigating, talking about elements, those beautiful things on the periodic table, how to use the periodic table to determine the numbers of protons, neutrons, and electrons for a particular element. We talked about how to find the average atomic mass for that element. And we also talked about how those elements come together in the periodic table in certain groups and certain periods. Now we're going to take those elements, those building blocks, and actually put them together and form compounds. And so in the next few videos, we're going to be talking about writing chemical formulas and chemical names for a variety of compounds. So the compounds that we're going to talk about in this course really fall into two different categories: the covalent or molecular compounds and ionic compounds. Covalent or molecular compounds, those are compounds that contain only nonmetals. Okay? Because they contain only nonmetals, the kinds of attractions that hold those elements together in a molecular compound are in the form of covalent bonds, specifically the sharing of electrons between nonmetals. The second type of compound that we'll talk about are ionic compounds. Ionic, as you can guess from the name, ionic compounds contain ions or charged species, specifically metals and nonmetals. So if you have a compound that has a metal and a nonmetal, then it's an ionic compound. And predominantly it is the metal that donates an electron to the nonmetal to form that molecule. And when that molecule is formed by the donation of an electron from the metal to the nonmetal, the attraction or the bond that is formed is called an ionic bond. So in ionic compounds, you have obviously ions. Metal is the cation, or the one that donates an electron, becoming positively charged. The nonmetal that accepts that electron becomes negatively charged and is the anion. So we're going to talk about how to write and name chemical formulas for both ionic and covalent or molecular compounds, but let's talk a little bit at first about chemical formulas. Okay, so we know that there's covalent and ionic compounds. When we write a chemical formula for a molecule, obviously we use the element symbol that's on the periodic table, and we use subscripts, forever and ever, amen. You always use subscripts when putting atoms together to form a molecule to say how many of that particular element is present in that species. I'm making a big deal about that because when we start to put molecules together to balance chemical equations, it's going to be important that you only use subscripts when writing balanced chemical formulas. And those balanced chemical formulas are really important because they say what that molecule is made of. So for example, when I say hydrogen peroxide, H2O2, that tells me that in one molecule of hydrogen peroxide, I have 2 hydrogen atoms and 2 oxygen atoms. Okay. So chemical formulas use element symbols and subscripts. All of these, hopefully you could have identified with my question here, all of these molecules that I have given you examples of, these are all molecular compounds. They're molecular because they only involve nonmetals, which is what I've got the answer here too. We're going to talk a lot about ionic compounds and how to put those ions together to form molecules. But take-home message from this slide before we stop for the next video is that molecular compounds are chemical formulas that always contain nonmetals. In the next video, we're going to finish up types of molecular formulas, and then we're going to progress on to ionic compounds.